Hi everyone, my name is Olivia. I'm a postdoc with Dr. Qin-Yao Lai from the Department of Geoscience in Princeton University. Today, I'm going to talk about a project on predicting the vulnerability of Firn to hydrofracture by means of poromechanical modeling. There are examples of porous medium in our daily life, such as sponges in the kitchen, which shrinks in size when we squeeze water out of it. Another example is sandstone, which has already attracted wide attention due to its ability to store oil, natural gas, or carbon dioxide. In medical or biological field, flow through biological tissue is an important process. The last example, which is the most relevant to glacier scientists, is firn or snow. In summary, a porous medium composed of a solid skeleton and an interconnected network of pores filled with a fluid, which could either be liquid or gas. And poromechanics couple fluid and solid mechanics to study the behavior of fluid-saturated porous medium, which also includes either pore pressure information or solid displacements and stresses. Though it hasn't been well recognized yet, poromechanics could contribute to predicting the fate of water in Greenland. Here are some processes involve solid-fluid coupling that poromechanics could be applied. The first example is to study how meltwater infiltrates into the porous firn layer beneath ice slabs to form the ice blob. This is what we are going to present in detail today. In the second example, researchers found that ice quakes activity peaked during rapid lake drainage events. So all these either blue circles or these white circles are the ice quake activities detected by seismic sensors. And they all peaked during rapid lake drainage events because lake drainage changes the basal water pressure and triggered either tensile or shear fracturing in ice. The third example is to study the interactions between subglacial plume and ice melange, which has connected pore space and should be considered as porous material. Now let's focus on the first example. In recent decades, meltwater runoff has accelerated to become the dominant mechanism for mass loss in the Greenland ice sheet. In the left figure, the blue color shows the distribution of ice slab thickness. The expansion of refrozen ice slab in Greenland has been believed to increase surface runoff, building on the assumption that ice slabs are impermeable. However, in recent work from Raleigh et al., they found that shallow fracture in ice slabs buffers surface runoff in northwest Greenland. The figure on the top shows radar images for northwest Greenland, which is inside the red box on the left map. The vertical axis shows the depths beneath the surface. The top 5 meters is ice slab with released firn underneath. Across the horizontal extent of 60 kilometers, they detect 15 ice blobs that formed from meltwater infiltration, which effectively buffers the high elevation surface runoff. However, it remains to be a puzzle why meltwater infiltrates into instead of fracturing the porous firn layer and lying ice slabs. To understand this process, we have to apply poromechanics instead of LEFM to account for the porous nature of firn layer. Before jumping into modeling details, let me first introduce an important concept in poromechanics, which is effective stress. When stress is applied to a porous material, it is opposed by the fluid pressure filling the pores in the material and also the solid skeleton. Effective stress is the calculated stress that is effective in deforming the solid skeleton, or in other words, causing displacements. And therefore, this is the stress we need for fracture analysis. The theory of poromechanics is derived from thermodynamics without any fitting parameters. It states that the change of total stress is taken up by both effective stress and pore pressure. Here, we take tensile as positive. Build coefficient is also introduced here to characterize the solid-fluid coupling strength. where K is the bulk modulus of the bulk volume and Ks is the modulus of the solid grain. The softer the material, the stronger the solid-fluid coupling. Here I show a classic example in poromechanics, the consolidation experiment. A constant confining weight on the top of the piston is applied to this consolidation soil, which is initially filled with spherical particles and also silicon oil. The photoelastic particles will light up, as you can see from this video, under effective stress, and will just remain in black color without stresses. In the second video, it shows that at the beginning, skeleton remains effective stress-free because they are in black color. The total confining weight is all taken up by pore pressure. As pore fluid is squeezed out of the soil from the top boundary, which is close to the atmospheric pressure, the total stress transmits to solid skeleton through skeleton deformation. This example clearly visualizes the stresses transmission from pore fluid to solid skeleton, which will take some time. And it also clearly emphasizes that pore fluid can indeed take a large proportion of the stress from the total confining weight. With this understanding, here is the setup for our two-dimensional, two-phase pore-elastic continuum model. We assume plane strain condition and work in XZ plane. Meltwater flows from the fractures in the S slab with a constant height HW. When water infiltrates into the porous Firn layer, part of the total stress, which is the hydrostatic water pressure, will be carried by pore pressure, and the rest to be carried by the Firn skeleton. We need to quantify the maximum tensile stress felt by the Firn skeleton to analyze its vulnerability against fractures. The input parameters are porosity, bulk modulus, Poisson ratio, and permeability of the Firn layer, and water column height above the crevasse tip as boundary condition. The four unknowns are displacements of the Firn skeleton in both X and Z directions, and pressure and water saturation fields. To resolve these four unknowns, we have four governing equations in total, two conservation of momentum equations from solid mechanics, and two fluid continuity equations from fluid mechanics for the two-phase respectively, which are water and air. After resolving the displacements, we can calculate effective tensile stress and compare with Firn's tensile strength to determine whether fracture will propagate or not. And as the process is axisymmetric, we only focus on half of this domain, that X extent changes from 0 to L, and Z extent covers from 0 to H. So here shows the spatial temporal evolution of pressure and stress during meltwater infiltration. The top panel shows the shape of the water infiltration front. The quarter elliptical shapes reflects the effect of gravity. The middle panel shows the pore pressure field, and the bottom panel shows the effective stress field. As we can see from the bottom figure, the most vulnerable area against hydrofractures is indeed at the crevasse tip, where skeleton endures the maximum tensile stress. We also found that most of the confining stress is taken up by pore pressure, and only 11.6% of the hydrostatic pressure gets transmitted into the Firn skeleton. And that is the only part that will determine whether fracture can propagate or not. Next, we conduct scaling analysis on the effective stress and modeling parameters. The modeling results are shown in cross markers. The continuum predictions are shown in red dashed lines. The left figure shows that effective stress linearly scales with build coefficient. The softer the porous Firn, the larger tensile stress felt by the skeleton. On the right figure, the model predicts that effective stress linearly scales with the water column height in the S lab. The results are consistent with the continuum predictions. At the end, we combine all the simulation results on a single figure where we plot effective stress against build coefficient times hydrostatic pressure. The cross markers are models with constant water height as boundary condition, and circular markers are constant infiltration rate as boundary condition. We vary build coefficient, permeability, water column height, infiltration rate, and width of the crevasse tip, the results of which all collapse onto a single line in this final figure with a coefficient of 0.22. In summary, Firn only feels less than 22% of the hydrostatic pressure. In the second part of this project, Riley will show you how to apply this very simple scaling argument to scan through the whole parametric space of Greenland's Firn, including both hydraulic and also mechanical properties. And here is our final conclusion. Greenland's Firn is invulnerable against hydrofractures. In this plot, we show how the maximum tensile stress felt by the solid skeleton depends on the water column height. For solid ice, it's easy to enter the tensile region where fractures might propagate, whereas for Firn, the stress is always compressive and it's impossible to fracture it. Come to our poster session this afternoon if you want to hear more from Riley. To conclude, our paramechanical model answers the question we posed at the beginning. What prevents water-filled crevasses in ice slabs from propagating unstably through the underlying released Firn layer? The presence of permeable Firn layer prevents fracture propagation because a significant portion of the hydrostatic stress is accommodated by changes in pore pressure, which takes over 78%, rather than being transmitted to the solid skeleton, which only takes even smaller than 22%. So this is the end of the presentation. Please feel free to raise any questions. Thank you.